A warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We have to lead things off with the fact that Florida has much of their team back. Thomas Haugh, he decides that he is going to be returning to Florida for this upcoming season. We'll talk about what that means for them, and how about if we get the perfect guest aboard for talking about what we're going to be seeing with Florida and the SEC in general. Blake Lovell, he does great work over at Southeastern 16. He's going to be joining me in segment number 2. We're going to be chatting, obviously, about Florida, the fact that they haven't really added anyone in the transfer portal, but they've got so many guys coming back that things are going to be rock solid for them. We're going to talk about the moves that we have seen around the SEC and a few teams in general outside the SEC that have caught his eye in terms of the moves that they made here in the final segment. In the final segment, going to get you guys a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. Then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And with regards to what we've got with the Florida Gators, my goodness, Thomas Haugh, he was the leading scorer for the team, 17 points, 6 boards, pair of assists. He has returned, and really the main guy that entered in the transfer portal for this team is Olivier Ryu. I mean, he's noteworthy because he's the 7'9" gentleman. There's just not really much of a way that you can design a up-tempo offense around a 7'9" guy. He just wasn't necessarily a great fit with Florida, so he entered in the transfer portal, but they're thinking that Ruben Chenyulu is most likely going to be coming back as well. He was able to give the team 11.2 rebounds, 7.9 points per game for a Florida team that, depending upon when you looked last year, they were either number 1 or number 2 in terms of rebound percentage. They did also have Micah Hand logged in, entered in the transfer portal as well, but other than those guys, and guys are just simply flat out of eligibility, but I mean, they're fishing for eligibility for Denzel Aberdeen. Xavier Lee should be out of eligibility, but you never know with regards to fifth year sort of thing that might be happening. I know that Rick Pitino had some very interesting thoughts on that as well, and that could work out very swimmingly for the teams. Looking at you, LSU, looking at you, Kentucky, and we'll talk about them in segment number 2 with our good friend Blake Lovell that have not really signed a lot of guys here in the offseason, but for Florida, it looks like this team is going to be a force once again. Now, the big thing for them is that they're going to need to add some three-point shooting. Last year, they were outside the top 300 with regards to their three-point shooting percentage at 31.2%. They were obviously rock solid down low. Now you bring back a guy in Haugh who, he was one of their top three-point shooters last year. He shot 32.6% from 3, which doesn't sound like much, but he was the lone out of their 5 double-figure scorers that shot above 29.2% from 3. Really good versatility. Threw in there a steal per game, a block per contest as well. We saw Florida have their struggles towards the early part of the season. They picked it up a little bit late. They've got the best front court in all of college basketball in a day and age in college basketball where, yes, guard play is so important, but I mean, you look at the teams that were able to make deep runs in the NCAA tournament. They were teams that were mostly built around their bigs, like Michigan. You just needed a functional guy in Elliot Kadu to be able to run the ship. He was able to do so, and they were able to let those bigs take over. Arizona, who I recognize that they took that ugly loss at Michigan, but I mean, throughout the course of the season, they were either number 1 or number 2 in all of college basketball. They were built around the big men as well. It's really impactful what we're seeing out of Florida. Again, they're going to need to sign a guy or two, and they need Boogie Fland if he decides that he's going to be sticking around to be a little bit more effective than he was this past season, shooting 24% from 3 after he was quite good at Arkansas in his first season. No bueno there, but certainly for Florida, looks like they're going to be a force moving forward, and it's just a really, really big sign for them, getting back Thomas Haugh, a guy that easily was going to be a first-round draft pick. We'll talk a little bit more about that and all about the SEC on the flip side with our good friend Blake Lovell of Southeastern 16, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word, .com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Seats with myself, Greg Peters, and now part of the VSiN family podcast. Always great to be joined by this man as we've got Blake Lovell aboard. He does such amazing work over at Southeastern 16, looking at this great game of college basketball based out there in the wonderful state of Tennessee, and he's got his finger on the pulse of a little bit of everything that we're seeing here in this wild and crazy offseason. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell. And Blake, it's always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks as always for having me, Greg.
Blake, the transfer portal is now officially closed, and it closes with about 5 billion players entering into the transfer portal. As a matter of fact, 2,659 at my count. Might be off by one or two, but that said, just what do you make of the fact that we saw a lot of guys that are just flat out of eligibility, fishing for eligibility, put their name in the last minute? Because I thought that was really unique about what we saw earlier in the week.
Yeah, no doubt about it, because like you said, I think it's just sort of the trend.
How Tyler Nichols going to get eligibility, I have no idea.
I know. That's what we're trying to figure out, right? Is guys like that you were just thinking there's no way that we can even consider the idea that they could be, part of this thing next season. And now
Antoine Jones was in the same recruiting class as Zion Williamson.
I mean, there are guys that feel like they've been playing for a decade now, and there are some guys who are pretty close. I mean, they're closer to a decade than they are 2 years maybe at this point. So I think that's just sort of the nature of where things are. And I feel like we've been saying for years that, hey, eventually, this will change. And yeah, I mean, it may and it may not. And so, yeah, I'm curious to see which of these guys, as we always say, anytime you have like these waiver scenarios and all that and eligibility, if you give one, the nod, you've kind of got to do it for everyone. And otherwise, it just looks completely absurd. So yeah, no clue how this all plays out for some of these guys.
Yeah, it's very interesting to say the least. But hey, we saw Charles Bediako play for Alabama last year, so it feels like with that, anything is possible. So that's interesting. And do you think that there are a few teams out there that might be banking on some of these guys becoming eligible? Because I've noted this on the podcast, and I think that you'd agree with me. Very surprising that Kentucky hasn't signed more guys as we're doing this right now. It might change by the time this podcast posts because, man, you got 100 billion guys signing. But, they pick up 2 guys in the portal, and Alex Wilkins and Zoom Dial, and that's it. And LSU's roster right now is Mohamed Diabate. Looks down at notes and Mohamed Diabate.
Yeah, these two teams in particular, I think, certainly high expectations for their fan bases for different reasons. Next season, LSU brings back Will Wade, and I think that when you looked at the coaching staff they put together, you're thinking, all right, they're just going to come out here pretty quick and make moves. But that hasn't been the case, and I think with LSU, they're waiting for one of the bigger fish that are still out there to make a decision, and Alan Graves, and I think that that's kind of one that would probably start a pretty significant domino effect for LSU. But again, that's the wait and see approach. You still have many other places you got to fill on the roster other than one guy. They can't play 2-on-5. So I think, though, if that happens, it seems like that is one where all of a sudden you're going to see 2 or 3 more names. Of course, Paul McNeil, someone else out there that was at NC State, as we know. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And so I feel like LSU kind of has an idea, but yet probably the same as we said with Sean Miller last year and Bucky McMillan as well. It's sort of like you're probably not expecting this to be Will Wade's best roster in his return season. But I think it's just simply a timing thing and all that. So for Kentucky, it's just it's a mess, as you know. And you have the governor calling out the athletics and all this other stuff. Like, it is just really a situation where you're looking at this and feeling like, what else do you do? Because there are only, again, so many sort of big players that are still out there that are even considering Kentucky. Of course, Stokes is one of the biggest dominoes that could still fall. If they get him over Kansas, then that would be significant and give Kentucky, a pretty substantial boost. But if they don't, I think that's the big scenario. If they don't, then, you're looking at a team that could still fill some spots with some of the guys that are still available. But, right now, Greg, I don't, if you're projecting, I don't know that you could project Kentucky as anything more than a middle-of-the-pack SEC team. And That's just based on where they're at and also what a lot of these other teams have done to this point.
Yep, and middle of the pack in the SEC, for that fan base, that is not good enough. And we both know that, as we've got Blake Lovell. He does such great work over at Southeastern 16, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And we're talking about all these transfer moves, and very rightfully so. But how do you take a look at some of these teams in the SEC that they're actually bringing back a few guys? Like right now, the Malik Thomas situation for Arkansas is big because he has entered in the NBA draft, but he can still come back. That's obviously a huge decision for them. And for Arkansas, they've been a little bit silent here in the portal, so I feel like they might be banking on him being able to come back. But I know you noted this the last time you joined me. Florida, they've got quite a few guys that are going to be back from a season ago, and I think that that's just so big in this day and age, having not just the transfers coming in, because I love what Tennessee is doing, but at the same time, you've got some of these teams that they're going to be running back some of their guys. Like, to go outside the SEC for a second, I absolutely love the fact that Duke has signed a few guys, and at the same time, they've got a pair of returners that are going to be back in that starting lineup for next season as well. I think that there are a few teams here in the SEC, mainly Florida, that I think have gotten it right this.
I think it's hard to not look at Florida and feel like that is, maybe the preseason number one team in the country, all things considered. If Denzel Aberdeen gets a waiver, I think it's pretty much a lock at that point. Even if he doesn't, I think Florida's got some backup options that would still probably put them in that position. If not them, it's Michigan or Duke probably. So at worst, I mean, you're talking Florida being a top 3 team in the country heading into next season with Thomas Haugh returning. And of course, Condon, and you're waiting on Ruben Chenyalu. I would probably lean more towards thinking he'll be back, but you never know with the NBA draft process how guys are going to perform and impress, scouts and all that stuff. So I do think it's one where if you look at the makeup, I mean, how many teams not just are going to get back your core that have now played together for maybe 3 years, but you've also got the complementary guys who could have went elsewhere, maybe got paid a little more money to have a more substantial role. These guys are coming back to kind of be in those similar roles and then also expand their game a bit. So it's a unique situation in Florida. I mean, I think they're easily the front runner in the SEC, but you can also look at some of these other teams and see just exactly how they've kind of put some things together thus far. And I think that's where, you're looking at teams like Texas and who they've been able to retain. Texas A&M has kind of flipped their roster. I think those are two of the better teams. Tennessee is a team that I think initially you're thinking, man, wow, they just got completely hit hard by this transfer portal, but all they've done is completely, replaced everybody almost, except for maybe a key piece or two in the front court. So it's looking like, I think with the SEC, some of these teams right now, I didn't mention Auburn, Missouri, Vanderbilt. I think Vanderbilt looks like a top 15 team right now. And so there's a lot of teams doing some good work. And it's really just a matter now, I think, for these teams in particular, how you fill out the rest of your roster.
Yep, I think so as well. And I think that some of those returnees are going to be really good for those teams. And I have to talk to you because we mentioned that LSU and Kentucky are a little bit head scratching. How about a team that has made moves, but I'm just still wondering what it's all going to yield? And that would be Texas A&M, because they've got PJ Haggerty, who they pick up, who I just don't know if that's Bucky McMillan's system, because last year, I think that you know this as well as I do, Texas A&M, it felt like it was a whole is greater than the sum of its parts team. You didn't necessarily have that one go-to scorer, but you had a lot of guys that were going to be able to give you 10 or 12 on any given night. I do like the fact that they picked up Jalen Reese on Wednesday as well, but how are you looking at A&M thus far? Because it does feel like adding a guy like Haggerty means that he's going to be really the featured guy, and I just don't know if that's going to be the world's greatest fit with what I think is a very good Bucky McMillan system.
They've certainly given themselves options with what they want to do, because you do have such just a volume type guy in him. And then you look up and you're like, well, hold on a second. Like, now they've added Bryson Warren, who, of course, if everybody's like, wait a minute, Bryson Warren, don't worry. You're going to hear that name debated a lot. And the reason why is he's coming from the G League. So we know how that's going to go. But he is someone who hasn't played in college. So for now, he certainly is in a spot where he's going to play for Texas A&M. And then, they brought over Jalen Reese. That was an addition today as we talk. Like, he was kind of confirmed to come over. And so I think it is one where you're going to look at probably that duo right now of Warren and Haggerty and really just say, well, these guys are going to probably score. And then you're like, well, there's also Mackenzie Mbako, who was probably projected to be the leading scorer last year, but didn't play a whole lot due to injury. And so I think it's one where volume is going to be very interesting on this team when it comes to just the distribution of points and who's getting the shots. And like you said, how do you fit into the Bucky McMillan system? I think that's going to be a big question probably for Texas A&M. But if you do look at just pure talent, right now. I think there's plenty of reasons to be optimistic about what they're going to be able to do. And, I probably would put them, in the top half of the SEC at the moment. It's just a matter of, as we're going to do with all these guys. And this is what we do in the transfer portal. How do you fit into your new spot? But, I think at least when you compare them to quite a few other rosters in the SEC, feels like talent-wise that they're a little bit ahead there.
Yep, I do agree with you as well. And how about if we bring up a school that we've had a few offseason chats thus far? We haven't really talked too much about them, but Auburn. They really had themselves a big week this last week. Bucky Oboye, he comes over from Santa Clara. Adam Olson, who began his career at the non-Division I ranks, tore it up with South Alabama. South Alabama team that was a little bit pesky against Auburn in the NIT. He comes over. Owen Freeman is a guy that a few seasons ago was rock solid over at Iowa. What do you make on this? Because I feel like Stephen Pearl deserves some credit with the way that he has handled the portal thus far, because it's very clear that Auburn was very, very weak on the defensive side of things. They weren't necessarily the world's greatest team in terms of the defensive glass. Offensive glass, they were quite good, but on the defensive side of things, they were very weak down low. They've been able to address that, and bringing back Taj Pettiford as well, who he easily could have went to the draft last year. I feel like they've had a really nice offseason thus far.
Yeah, I think so too. And, that was, like you said, defense was the big issue for them last year. But it's clear that they went out and said, all right, we're going to get bigger, and maybe that'll help us defensively, because it's like anytime you look up, you're thinking, where are they going to play all these guys that are, 6'10" and taller? And so, yeah, I mean, Thomas Dowd coming over, like, I think he's someone that'll make a huge impact right away, coming over from Troy when you look at just his numbers. And this guy was just an absolute warrior. I mean, he rarely came off the floor. And, you bring in Owen Freeman, who gives him size at 6'10", 240. Buki, a boy, I think, 7'1". You've got a freshman coming in at 7 foot. And so they've certainly got the size. And even if you look at it, with who's going to play the two guard, Kevin Overton, he's about 6'5", guy. It's, I think, built quite nice for the SEC. And so, yeah, I think right now, when you look at just the makeup, and then, of course, you do have Todd Pettiford, who could get back into that SEC, player of the year type conversation, depending on the year he has. I think Auburn's done a really good job of kind of revamping their roster based on their weaknesses from last year. There are people that are still going to question whether Stephen Pearl's the guy there or not, but I think if you see what they've addressed since the end of the season and being able to retain a couple of those key guys, I think it's a pretty impressive roster for Auburn, who, quite frankly, may be close to done, and we can't exactly say that for any other SEC team, it seems, right now.
Yep, absolutely. I love what I've been seeing out of them thus far this offseason, so it's going to be interesting to see what we get on that front. As joining me on the show, we've got Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16 right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and certainly it is a just wild time in general. We've seen 100 billion moves, and we've talked about the SEC teams, the good, the bad, and somewhat of the indifferent, but is there a team or two outside the SEC that has really caught your attention? Maybe they've done things wrong here in the offseason, maybe they've done things right, but has there been a team or two that you've been looking at and they just have really caught your eye thus far?
It's hard to ignore what Louisville's doing, that's for sure. Because you're just, again, you're looking up, and it is like it's a comparison game, as always, with Kentucky and Louisville. And I think when you look at what they've done, of course, landing Fulgaris here in the past couple of days, and so they've got him in there now with Badunga. I mean, you got 2 6'10" guys that are kind of leading the way. We've always talked about Carter Knox, I think, and just the intrigue that he added at Arkansas. Injuries kind of set him back this past year, but he was a very, breakout type star, potential guy you could have looked at. And so I think with what they've done, I think I've been pretty fascinated just to see, again, kind of how things have come together there in terms of what they're doing. Another team that I'm kind of curious about, and I think it's because they've really, I don't want to say fallen off the radar, but I mean, we are talking about a team that won a national championship not too long ago. And I think it's been kind of fascinating to see how this thing is going to be sort of turned around to the level, maybe not that level, but being a team that is much more consistent in what we were used to. And that's Baylor, because, you think about it, right? They missed the NCAA tournament last year for the first time in 6 years, I think it was. They've kind of just been floating around that, I'd say, middle of the pack, upper tier in the Big 12. And then, of course, last year you had a bit of that drop off. But I think when you look at all the guys that they brought in, which is quite a few, right? And so I think when you think about all the transfers, how they're going to mix together, I think Baylor's one that I'm curious about. Not to say that I think they're going to wind up being up there with the top tier in the Big 12. I mean, I don't know that I'm going to look at them over, Houston and Arizona and Kansas potentially if they get Stokes and all that. But I'm curious to see where Baylor slots, heading into next season, just based on, you always know, Greg, it seems like Scott Drew's name always comes up in coaching searches in the offseason and all that. But how does it go this season? And is it one where eventually maybe you're like, all right, yeah, we just can't find that mojo we had several years ago? I think I'm kind of fascinated by that.
I am as well. And how much you look at Baylor and what they've added, and you just think that they're going to try to win games like 190, because that's the way that I look at things, because they're not adding guys that were part of good defenses, but holy crud, Brett Decker is able to pop it from three. Isaac Salazar was a part of a great Yale offense, and a Yale team that didn't play a lot of defense, and it just feels like they've added a lot of guys that are amazing on offense, leave something to be desired on defense, and I think that that's going to cause for a lot of clean family fun.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. You look at the best teams he's had there, they've obviously been pretty good on both sides of the court when that's happened. Now, the volatility in terms of the outcomes has happened more so over the last 4 seasons, it feels like, and if you look at it, still had really good offense at times, like, top tier offenses, but the defense has really been lagging behind these past 4 seasons, if you look at all the efficiency numbers and all that. So it is one where I'm curious, because more so of the Scott Drew aspect of this. I'm just wondering, is there going to be someone that eventually kind of plucks this guy away from Baylor? And if you have another season, let's say going into this year, where they don't make the NCAA tournament, or let's say they barely make it, something like that, what does that look like for him maybe going into next offseason? And I think that's just kind of something, again, that's always on our radar, because he's a name that's always out there. And you have to remember, like, he's only 55. I think that's easy to forget, too. It's like, this guy's still pretty young if you think about it. And so I think Baylor's kind of an interesting team to keep an eye on in what is obviously a Big 12 that is kind of dominated by some of these top tier teams. I mean, look at some of the additions. Texas Tech brings in Cruz Davis, and we know kind of what to expect for some of these other, top tier teams. We mentioned Kansas, of course, Iowa State is a team that I think is going to certainly be right up there yet again, and so forth. So, yeah, I'm curious just to kind of see how it plays out there for them.
Yep, I am as well. That's going to be a fun team for this upcoming season. And what is always fun is chatting with you, Blake. You do such an amazing job looking at this great sport all 12 months out of the year. Love to get people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, you can find all of our SEC stuff over at Southeastern 16 on YouTube. Of course, daily SEC basketball transfer stuff right now, and potential coaching moves, I guess, depending on what Todd Golden decides to do, all this other stuff. So, yeah, check us out over at Southeastern 16 on YouTube. Everything else college basketball related, you can find me on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell.
And Blake doing such an incredible job looking at this amazing sport of basketball. A big thanks to Blake for joining me on Cuts to Cups Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming up next, let's get you guys a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Blake Lovell. He does such amazing work over at Southeastern 16. Looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. He did so once again today. So a big thanks to Blake for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time in the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. UNLV's top scorer, Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, guy that actually began his career over at Illinois and really had a nice end to the season last year. Overall, he had 20.5 points, steal and half per contest, shot 41.4% from three, 23.6 points per game out there in conference play. He has decided that he is going to be going to Texas Tech. Really good ad here for Texas Tech. It's a Texas Tech team that is always built around just great balance in general. They were one of the top 3-point shooting teams in all of college basketball this past season, and Greg McCasland has done a great job of just curtailing his system all around just the Big 12 play in general. Demarion Dennis is also coming over from Wyoming. That's not necessarily an impactful ad, but now they get Lawhorn along Cruz Davis, another 19 to 20 point per game scorer who was over at Officer last season. I would say that Cruz Davis is a little bit more of a facilitator. Lawhorn is a guy that's able to pop it a little bit more from three. Even though Lawhorn is a little bit shorter at 6'1", I think that these two are going to be able to work very well together. Now we're going to see what they're going to be able to get down low, because obviously JT Toppin, that was a big guy for them last season that was able to come through in a big way. We're going to see what that NBA draft decision is going to be holding for him. But overall, like the ads thus far for Texas Tech, do have to have a little bit of question mark with what they're going to be able to get down low, but do like what they're able to do there. And then in terms of Big 12, West Virginia with another nice ad. They've already added Javon Buchanan coming over from Boise State as a double-figure scorer. Finley Bizjack, who was able to Bizjack teams over at Butler. Mohamed Ziala, former top 50 recruit of Georgia Tech, who's going to be able to help things out down low. And now they bring in Martin Somerville, guy that has worked his way up from the low major level. He, 2 years ago, as a freshman over at UMass Lowell, was a 40% three-point shooter, 13.5 points, 3.5 assists, steal and a half per contest, and was a part-time starter for Florida State, 8 points per game, shot about 34% from three-point range. He did have a little bit of drop-off with his three-point shooting towards the back half of the season, but was one of the better players in terms of generating turnovers. He's a guy that's able to dole it out. I think that he's going to fit very well. He's played up-tempo. He's played in a system over at UMass Lowell that values a little bit more rebounding, so he's a little bit of an interchangeable guy. With Russ Haugh, obviously, his teams play a little bit more defense-oriented, a little bit more slowly. I think that he's going to be able to check those boxes. I think that this is a really nice ad for them. Adam Harkow, he was over at Wyoming this last year, 6'7", little bit of a combo guy that did not see a whole heck of a lot of run this past season. He was able to average for the team 6 points per game, shot 38% from three-point range, a little bit of a one-trick pony that mostly came in off the bench. He has decided that he's going to be going to Western Michigan, and for Western Michigan, I really like what they've been able to do this offseason, because for Western Michigan, things were not great for them last few seasons. They've decided that they're going to put some money into it. They bring in Khalil Fennell, who was over at UT Rio Grande Valley. He's bringing with him some of his top guys. Julian Gomez was a nice point guard for the team. Jalen Washington, a nice scorer for them. He brings with him from the Southern Conference Rob Lee, who was rock solid over at Lamar. Augustus Claudulis, who 2 seasons ago over at VMI was a really nice scorer. Like, this is a well-built roster right now. I really applaud the moves, and I think that this is a nice one for them. For Wichita State, they get on the board with another transfer. They are really looking to build up that backcourt. They already added Jordan Frinson, top scorer from Chattanooga, Jahari Long, guy that began his career over at Maryland and was very solid over at George Mason this last season. Now they've got the Herd in Bryce Herd, 6'6", a little bit of a combo player. Last year shot 36.5% from three-point range, 6.5 points per game. Was playing for a Dayton team that was good in terms of generating turnovers, and that was a kryptonite for Wichita State. Not a team that necessarily had the most active of fans this last season, but I do think that he's going to be able to be a nice fit for this team. Now, you do have to wonder if they're going to be able to get back the Wilberg, because the main specialty for Wichita State last season was their offensive rebounding. They do lose a few guys on that front, so that's a little bit of a question mark. They're going to need to address that, but in terms of backcourt, looking very strong, especially out there in the American Conference. Nikos Chidakoulis, he last season was over at Robert Morris, a rock solid player, 11 points, 7.5 boards. Not a guy that really pops it from three-point range at all, but a guy that when he was over at North Carolina A&T throughout his career there, he was averaging about 1.4 blocks per game. He's heading on over to Xavier. I don't think that he's going to be a starter over at Xavier, because you've got Michael Nwoko, who comes over from LSU, and when it comes to Xavier, they've really packed this roster. Chance Westery was a nice scorer over at UAB, not a guy that really bombs it from three, but that's why you bring in Drew Washington and Ruben Dominguez. Dominguez coming over from Texas A&M. Roland Zalajibi, he's another nice depth piece that comes on over from Southern Illinois. Xavier was a little bit lackadaisical on defense. Chidakoulis, he should be able to help out with that quite a bit. He's got some nice versatility. He's able to guard multiple positions. Really like what Xavier's putting together here in the offseason. Another nice ad for them on Thursday. So, in my opinion, they've certainly been able to get it right here thus far. You've got Loyola Chicago getting on the board with another ad as Malik Diallo. He was over at TCU this last season. Not a guy that saw a whole bunch of run, but he should be able to give this team a little bit of depth. He saw more minutes 2 years ago, as he only played in one game last year because he was just dealing with injury. But this is a 6'9" big man that they need to pick up the pieces because they lose Miles Rubin in the offseason. And when he was playing 2 years ago, I recognize it doesn't sound like much, but 0.6 blocks per game and only about 11 minutes per contest. He's able to be a nice low post presence. He's not a guy that's going to stretch the floor. They already addressed the backcourt issues from a season ago with adding Donald Hand, guy that's not going to pop it from three, but is able to do a lot of things at 6'5". Desan Nasai, he was a nice three-point shooter, a nice overall versatile piece over at Cleveland State this last season. Jason Schofield, he gives them a little bit more down low along with Eddie Ricks, and Ricks is more of that 6'7" combo player that's able to pop it and lock it from three-point range. Loyola Chicago, after a just absolutely miserable year last year. Like, boy, it could not have gone any more wrong for this team. These are some nice ads for them. They are very much doing a good job in terms of improving there, and I do think that the arrow is pointing upward for them, but I still do think that there's a lot of question marks to be answered, but so far, so good here in the offseason. McNeese is having themselves a nice offseason. You add in there Elijah Moore, Ali Malouk, along with Christian Nitu. These are all guys from the power conference level. Deleek Warren as well, coming over from Mississippi State. These guys weren't necessarily, shall we say, rambunctious pieces, but now they add in there another guy from a power conference level, and this one is that impact guy, Corey Chess. Now, last year over at Ole Miss, it just wasn't a system for him. He was averaging 2.5 points, 3.8 rebounds per game. Go back to when he was freshman over at LSU. He was a starter for that team. 6 points, 6.6 rebounds, 1.2 blocks per contest. McNeese was a team that did allow a lot of second and third chances on the glass. They were really good in terms of generating turnovers. This is a really nice ad for them. That very much addresses all their low post needs right there. And for McNeese, they've now added 6 guys that were playing at the power conference level last season. For McNeese, like, again, these are not necessarily guys that saw like 100 billion minutes or anything like that, but I mean, these are heavily recruited guys. These are guys that went through practices and wars with power conference teams. Very good sign there. I absolutely love what these guys are doing. NC State, they get on the board with another ad. They already added Kyle Evans, a really nice shot blocker from UC Irvine. Preston Eatman, he was that nice number 2 piece for Hofstra. Christian Hammond, he was rock solid over at Santa Clara. Now they add in there Emil Yeho. He last season was over at Washington State, guy that's in 6'8" and has got good versatility. Shot 40% from 3-point range, 10 points, 6 rebounds per game. Now, Washington State team that really didn't generate a lot of turnovers, and let's go what it is. They were not necessarily the world's most amazing defensive team. Justin Gainey, he's got his work cut out for him after Will Wade leaves in the offseason. I think they've done a nice job in terms of adding, like, for lack of better terms, some fire and ice here. They've got a roster where they can go in a lot of different directions. This is going to be Justin Gainey's first real job at the Division I level as a main coach. He's been an assistant at so many different places, so I'm very interested to see what his overall system is going to be, because it's really hard to pinpoint it right now with the guys that they brought in, but they've got options, and that's a good thing if you're a first-year head coach. For Northwestern, they had the option of adding Oku Frederico, and they decided to take him up on it. He was playing over at Drake this last season, and rock solid player down low, 8.5 points, 5 boards, only about a 28% three-point shooter, and I'm calling it what it is. If Northwestern is banking on Oku Frederico to take them to the promised land, they are not going to be getting to the promised land, but some nice ads here. Colin Smith, a guy that began his career over at Vanderbilt, double-figure score over at UC Santa Barbara at 6'8", is able to pop in and lock it from 3. Luke McKeldin, solid low post player for Mount St. Mary's last season. L.A. Pratt, in the games that he played for Northeastern last year, averaged 17 points per game. Unfortunately, was injured. And then Jack Krasinski, who at 6'7", is able to bomb it from 3, was a part of a Bellarmine team that was really, really good on offense. Also a Bellarmine team that was really, 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 really bad on defense, but they were quite good on offense. Northwestern always does a great job in terms of taking care of the ball, so they've got that all taken care of. I do think that this is going to be a solid ad for them, and that said, it's, again, a case where this should be a depth piece for them. They should be a little bit better down low for this upcoming season. This is going to be able to help out with that a little bit, so I do applaud the moves. They are looking themselves in the mirror in terms of their weaknesses, trying to be able to address them. Now they just need to be able to find a way to just have a little bit more stability and have a little bit more of a backbone on defense. For Arizona State, you've got the Randy Bennett, shall we say, connection happening once again. They added Paulius Marsoukas a little bit earlier in the week. You obviously have Nate Garcia, who follows his coach, who's now an assistant there, in Rick Croy, on over from Cal Baptist. You've got WCC guys in Joel Foxball from Portland and Emmanuel Incente coming over from Gonzaga. Now they pick up Dylan Shaw. Now, was Shaw a guy that was an absolute lightning rod over at St. Mary's? No, but he could be a nice glue guy for this team, and he could be a guy that comes in off the bench and is a microwave on offense. 7.5 points, 5.5 boards at 6'7", shot 41.6% from 3-point range as a freshman, so there's a little bit of upside here. Can't think that in year number 1 he's going to be like some guy that puts up double figures out there in the Big 12 or anything like that, but a very good option to have. I really like this move for them, and for Auburn, they're taking a little bit of a stab here on George Kimball III. When you saw him at his full force when he was over at Eastern Kentucky a few seasons ago, this guy was really good. Like, when George Kimball was out there during the 2024-25 season, 18 points, 3 assists, 2.6 steals per contest, shot 35% from 3. Did not see a single game for Vanderbilt this last season, but if they're able to get even just a fraction of that, that's going to be big, because they've already got Taj Pettifer coming back. They've addressed the low post with Bucky Oboye coming on over from Santa Clara. Adam Olson is a 6'7" combo player from South Alabama. Thomas Dowd is a guy that was really good for Troy as a double-double machine for them this last season, so I do like this move for them that really solidifies the backcourt, and they've looked themselves in the mirror. They realize that they need to be a little bit better down low. They should be better down low for this upcoming season. We talked about this with our good friend Blake Lovell. Feels like Baylor's just happy action fun time with regards to the offense. They had another man in Evan Chapman. This should help a little bit more with the defense and the low post play. 8.8 points, 8.8 rebounds per game. He was over at UAB this last season, averaged darn near a block per contest. Not a guy that's going to light it up from 3. Finally, a little bit of defense for Baylor. Now, I still think that with the way that Baylor is built, if, for one, you're relying upon Evan Chapman as one of your main low post presence, that's probably not a place where you want to be, and they're going to need to add more defense because, man, it looks like they are going to be all gas but no breaks this far this season. But still, this is a nice starting spot for them. They get a little bit more. Now, I don't know what's going to be happening with the high point transfer in Jocelyn Bodu, who he missed the entirety of last season due to injury. Because he missed last season due to injury, he's going to be eligible to come back. If they're able to have him back, then I think that you're looking at a little bit more of something in terms of defensive front, in terms of being able to block things up down low. But I do think that this was a very necessary add for them. I do think that this is a relatively solid add for them. For Cal Baptist, they're obviously picking up the pieces from losing Rick Croy, but I do think they're bringing in a guy in Ethan Duncan from Lipscomb is a nice starting spot. This is a guy that at 6 feet tall, he was able to give the team 10.5 points, shot 37% from three-point range, and on the defensive side, things just under a steal per contest. He was mostly coming in off the bench, and I don't know if he has the chops to necessarily be a facilitator for the team or anything like that. And obviously, you lose so much. When you lose your coach, you lose a guy in Dominique Daniels that was averaging 20-plus points per game. There's a lot of things that you need to pick up there, but still, this is a good starting spot for them. I would say that they probably need to find that main point guard, but do think that they're making steps in the right direction. For Charlotte, they've got another guy coming on over with Wes Miller from Cincinnati, and you thought that things were bad over at Cincinnati, but now they've got 4 guys coming with them. Jizzle James, who was one of the main men for them last season, he was their top three-point shooter. Kashawn Tillery was a little bit more of an ancillary guy. Tyler McKinley, he was able to give you some time down low, but obviously was lost in the shadow of the likes of Baba Miller and company. Jordy Rodriguez, he last season, he was able to give the team right around about 2.5 points per game. Plays professionally over at Spain, so he's a little bit of a international man of mystery for the team. Didn't see a ton of minutes, but over there with Charlotte, I do think that he's going to be able to see a lot of minutes. I think that there's a lot of upside here, and I do like the fact that you've got so many guys that are coming over with Wes Miller, so that shows that there's a little bit of loyalty with him, and I think that those are signs that Charlotte could be on the up and up for this upcoming season. For Cleveland State, they've done a nice job adding guys. They've got a pair of guys coming in from Kent State, Rayvon Griffith, along with DeAndre 3000 Jones. Owen Bronson is coming over from South Carolina State. It's very clear that this team is going to be looking to bomb it from three-point shot. They've got Jordan Lowry, who comes over from UT Arlington. This is going to give them a little bit more of a backbone on defense, or perhaps a facilitator. He's a guy that would coming off the bench, gave the team 4.5 points, about an assist half per contest for a UT Arlington team that they were really good in terms of guarding the three-point line last year. And guess what Cleveland State did not do last year? They did not guard the three-point line whatsoever. So they very much needed that one. This is a sign of things in the right direction for them. So I like that. For Colorado, last few seasons, they haven't added a lot in the transfer portal. They hit a home run with Barrington Hargress. They already added Noah Federson along with David Gomez. Gomez comes over from Charlotte. Didn't see a lot of minutes there. Federson, nice combo player over in North Dakota. I like this pickup for them, though. Justin Neely, he last year for a UNC Greensboro team that was way down. He was their Mr. Do-It-All. At 6'5", 18 points, 11.5 boards, 2.5 assists, threw in there a steal per contest, shot about 31.5% from three. Not a guy that's going to light it up from three, but last year for Colorado, very lackadaisical with their three-point shooting defense. Now, we'll say for Greensboro, it was a team that was lackluster on defense, to say the least, last year. I think that that's putting it about as politely as I can, but it wasn't necessarily because of him. It was because of more or less the knuckleheads that were all around him, but still, I do think that this is a solid add, and I do think that with this Colorado team being able to add in there the likes of Federson and company, that should be able to make them a little bit stronger down low. You've got Landon Joseph, who he was playing over at Marshall last year. He's going to be going to Dayton. This should be a depth piece for Dayton because they have made a lot of, shall we say, headway here in the transfer portal. Jalen Haynes, he missed all of last year with Cincinnati. 2 years ago, 6+ rebounder over at George Mason, so he's got familiarity with the Atlantic 10. Travis Perry is a guy that's able to be a top 100 recruit. He should be able to give you some facilitation, be able to bomb it from three. Grant Randall was highly productive over at Quinnipiac. Zane Lowry was putting up 8 points per game at Marquette last season, and for Joseph, he could be that guy that comes off the bench and bombs it from three. Last year over at Marshall, pair of assists, a steal, 8 points per game. He shot 41.3% from three-point. Is he ready to be a main feature guard? Probably not. Could he be a guy that helps out a Dayton team that last year they were uncharacteristically not amazing with regards to three-point shooting? I think so. So I like this pickup for them. At last, Delaware is on the board. They pick up a man from Nevada in Chuck Bailey, and this is a good starting spot for them. Like with Delaware, they had no depth whatsoever, so they're going to need to add more guys. But for Bailey, he began his career over at Evansville. His top year at Evansville, he was averaging about 8.5 points per game, shot for the team about 35% from three. And for Nevada this last year, 6.5 points per game, was about a 39% three-point shooter. He was able to add in there about an assist or two per contest. A guy that was a part-time starter, only saw about 18 minutes per game, but a 6'5" guy that very much fits a Delaware system that they were built a lot around their three-point shooting. So I do think that this is going to be able to fit exactly what they're going to be looking for there. And then CJ Highland, he last season was playing over at Western Carolina. He has decided that he is going to be adding on over to Denver. As we know with Denver, really good three-point shooting team last year. Boy, were they bad on defense, and CJ Highland is going to fit that mold as well, as Western Carolina was terrible at guarding the three-point line last year, but Highland, 6.5 points. He shot 42% from three-point range. Denver staying very, very true to their roots. They brought in pretty much the MSU Moorhead sort of roster and regime there from a season ago, and they were much more respectable this past year than they have been over the last decade, so steps are being taken in the right direction, even though I joke about the fact that they played no defense whatsoever. It was a lot of positivity for them, and this very much is going to be able to fit the style. If he's able to generate a turnover for two on defense, that is going to help them out quite a bit. And this is helpful for Drake. Rough year last year. They already had Drake Kindle, who should be able to run the point coming over from Wichita State. Now they bring in John Carroll, who he carrolled all the way to being the top rebounder over at Morehead State this last season. 11 points, 7.9 rebounds per game, and a guy that wasn't necessarily too much of a shot blocker. Morehead State did take a little bit of a fall off with their defense from his season ago, but he was highly productive down low. He's going to be able to give you a little bit more than his 6'7" size would probably indicate. Drake wasn't necessarily the world's worst team on the defensive glass. They were absolutely awful on the offensive glass. You should be able to give this team a few more second and third chances there. For Drake, they're probably going to need to add a little bit more in terms of the backcourt as well, but I mean, some nice subtle moves here made thus far. We're going to see what they do moving forward, because for Drake, they are not used to being down the way that they were a season ago. These are good, shall we say, first steps. Now they need to be able to make a little bit more of a leap there. With Brian Amunki, he was over at Wichita State this last season. I'm sure that I said that last name wrong, but he has decided that he's going to be adding on over to Fresno State with Amunke. He was beginning his career actually at Fresno State before he went to Wichita State this last season, and 2 years ago, Fresno State, 7.5 points. He's familiar with the coaching staff, shot 40% from three, and he's added along with Quentin Rhymes, who comes on over from Nebraska, 6'7" guy that when he was out there, he was able to bomb it from three, but didn't see a lot of playing time. Drongus Lagu, who is dealing with a little bit of injury last year over at UT Martin, but another guy that's able to pop it from three. Fresno State was absolutely awful with their outside shooting last year, so it's very, very clear what they're looking to do. They are looking to be able to clear up that weakness. Now, they're going to need to add someone down low, because they do lose Wilson Jaquez, who was able to give for them 8+ rebounds per game. He was able to be pretty rock solid for them down low, but they've done a nice job being able to address that weakness from a season ago. They're going to be able to be a much better three-point shooting team. And then you got Ryder Frost. He last year was playing over at Notre Dame, not a guy that was seeing like a mondo amount of minutes or anything like that. Former top 125 recruit, 3 points per game. Now, in the minutes that he did see, he shot 38.5% from three, and he's a native of the great state of Massachusetts. He's decided that he's going to play for our nation's first president, George Washington. Boy, if they added some guys. Malachi Arrington, he should be able to give them a little bit of insurance down low. Terrence Arsenault is really the main guy. Like, he was a part of that title team of the Houston Cougars from a few seasons ago, the team that went to the title game. Amari Witherspoon was a guy that put up good numbers over at Pittsburgh. Felix Carrasas was able to see some solid minutes over at Colorado. They bring in Dylan James from Georgia. They have done a great job. They should be, much like they were this a season ago, a team that's sort of like Noah's Ark. They're going to have two of everything, so I love what these guys are doing. For Georgia, it's been a little bit slow going here in the transfer portal, but they add another guy here on Thursday. They bring in Andrew Osani, who he was over at St. Bonaventure. 4 points, 3 rebounds per game. If he's making any sort of impact for Georgia, they are in deep, deep doo-doo. They bring in Freddie Daly, own double-figure score from Penn State, but Penn State played no defense. Brady Dunlap, he was a nice ancillary guy for St. Louis. Georgia very much falling behind with regards to the Joneses out there in the SEC, so they're going to need to add some more guys. I mean, it's good that they were able to ink someone, and if that's an ancillary piece and a just like walk-on, yay, verily there, but very clear. They're going to need to make some bigger moves here moving forward. And then you've got Elftrin Smith Jr. He was over at Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin this last year, and he's decided that he is going to be going to Georgia Southern. Guy that only averaged about 2 points a rebound and a half per contest, was a part of a really good Stephen F. Austin system. They've also got Josh Dixon, who's coming in, and that's a little bit more of your big ad for this Georgia Southern team. It was a Georgia Southern team that had a tough time in terms of taking care of the ball for UW Milwaukee. They did a nice job taking care of it, and for Dixon last year, 9 points per game, not a guy that's going to light you up from three. Only shot about 31% from distance, but I like that pickup for them. They get one guy down low. They get one guy that's going to be able to help out the backcourt. They still still have many pieces that they're probably going to need to add, but these are a good starting spot for them. And then you saw Hassan Washington. He last season was playing over at Northern Illinois. He has decided that he is going to be going on over to Grambling. Not a guy that was necessarily putting up massive numbers, but still a guy that shot 44% from three at 6'8", about 4.5 points, 3.2 rebounds per game. This could be a good diamond in the rough find for Grambling. And with Grambling, with your NIL, with the fact that they don't have as many resources as, shall we say, the top teams in all of college basketball, you need to be able to find diamonds in the rough. This actually could be that. I am very bullish on this ad for them. I think that this is a guy that was hiding out there in plain sight. Probably should have been seeing more minutes for a Northern Illinois team. Let's call it what it is. They were pretty terrible this last season, but good starting spot for them. We'll see what else they're going to be able to add moving forward, but I really do like this one for them. And then for Jackson State, they lose so much from his season ago, just Sean Ruffin and company being out. Now they do add Jaden Williams. So Williams was playing over at Incarnate Word this last season. This last season only averaged about 2.2 rebounds per game. You go back to what he did during the 2024-25 season, was a part-time starter, block and a half per contest, 5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. This team was as fragile as it gets down low. At 6'9", a guy that was able to be a part-time starter out there in the Southland, that is a good ad for Jackson State. Now, in my opinion, their work is far from done, and I don't know what sort of funds they have to be able to get anyone else whatsoever. I wish I could put it any other way, but still, this is a good starting spot for them. I do think that this has some upside there. They address a big weakness from a season ago, so that is going to be able to help them out. Casey Alexander has inked a lot of guys over there at Kansas State. You've got Desirek Lindsey coming over from Oregon. Timothy Mazlovich, that's a new one that comes over from Miami. He's a guy that really didn't see a lot of minutes this last season, but I truly do believe he's got some upside. He played a little bit of professional basketball over there in the continent of Europe, so that's going to be able to help them out. And now they had in there a Bradley ad, who I don't think that this is going to be anything big for them. And I mean, he's got a state name in there, Montana Wheeler. Wheeler last season over at Bradley, he was one of those nice ancillary pieces out there in the backcourt. He was able to give that team right around about 8.5 points, 3 assists for a team that was very good in terms of generating turnovers. He, from three-point shot, about 34% from three, was mainly a sixth man for the team. If that's a little bit of a depth ad, that's good because you got Brandon Retshiner, who comes over from Colorado State. He was able to draw out a little bit of point over at Virginia Tech a few seasons ago, a 7-footer in JT Rock. So it does feel like this is a team that has given themselves options in terms of the way that they want to play under Casey Alexander. They should be able to go a little bit more up-tempo, but at the same time, they should still be pretty strong on the defensive side of things as well. So like what they've been able to do there, we're going to see how the pieces are all going to be able to fit together, but so far so good. And then for Lemoyne, they've got a pair of pickups. They bring in Demaine King along with Khalil Williams. For Williams, last season he was playing over at Bryan, gave the team only about 2.5 points per game, so he's going to be having some familiarity with the northeast part of the country, but that's a little bit more of a swing in the dark. And then for King, he was over with a UT Martin team that was really good defensively this last season. Offensively, left something to be desired at 6'4", was able to give that team right around about 4.5 points, steal per contest. For Lemoyne, they were one of the worst teams in all of college basketball in terms of generating turnovers, and I think that that's a big commonality with the few pieces that they picked up here in the offseason. They are looking to be a little bit better on defense. They are going to be looking to have some more active hands, and I think that they've done a good job in terms of addressing that. We'll see how all these pieces are going to be able to fit together when it's all said and done, but I do think that they've been able to make some nice initial moves that with a team like a Lemoyne, who just a few years ago, they were at the non-Division I level. They've done a solid job there. For Virginia Tech, they've been a little bit quiet here in the offseason. Cool Atok, who comes over from Oklahoma, was really their main ad to begin with. Now they've added in their Miles Heidi. He was an ancillary piece last year over at San Diego State. 5.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. Considering they lose Nicola Salvadeus, and they've got quite a few guys that, as of right now, are out of eligibility. We'll see what happens with regards to the fifth-year thing, but they're going to need to add a little bit more. It's really not great for them if they're relying upon Heidi playing a big role for the team. They are really falling behind in the ACC because I've addressed it on the podcast. Teams like Boston College, teams like Pittsburgh, Syracuse, they've really addressed a lot of needs here in the offseason. They have went out, they have spent, they have put a lot of resources into this. Virginia Tech is not at this point, so they're going to need to add a few more guys. Congratulations on the fact that you had in there a guy that was a part of a nice defensive system, but they are certainly going to be needing a little bit more than that. For UC Riverside, they realized that they need a little bit more, and they added some more. How about Tony Duckett? He began his career over at San Diego. This last year over at St. Mary's, he really didn't see a lot of playing time for them. He was only able to average about 3 points per game. Go back 2 seasons ago with the Toreros, he was averaging about 10.5 points, 2 assists, shot 34% from three-point range as a freshman at 6'5". He gives some versatility with UC Riverside. They also are going to be keeping DeAndre Perlite Jr. I hope that I said that correct. He was a guy that at 6'5" gave them some versatility, so they've got a little bit of camaraderie there. James Evans Jr. was a nice 6'7", little bit of a gadget guy over at CSUN. Devin Malcolm was a part of a really good Cal Baptist defensive team. Dallas Washington, he's a little bit of an upside guy at 6'9" for UC Riverside after they were lacking, and I wish I could put it any other way, darn near everything last year. They've done a nice job in terms of being able to make themselves a little bit more well-rounded and whole. So I like the moves that they have made thus far. We'll see if there's going to be a few moves to be made here later on in the offseason. And I like this one for Texas. This happened after we talked with our good friend Blake Lovell. Texas, they add in their Mikey Lewis. Speaking of guys that were over at St. Mary's this last season, 14 points per game, shot 37% from three, a very pure scorer, guy that shot 88% at the free throw line, was a part of a backcourt that was just so strong in the defensive side of things. You've got a guy in Isaiah Johnson already who was able to average 13 plus points per game. Elijah Freeman had some good low post presence over at Auburn this last year. Amari Evans should be able to give this team some versatility and some good defense from Tennessee, because obviously with Texas, their kryptonite last year was the fact that this was not a very good defensive team, to say the least. They've been able to beef up there. I really like what they're doing, so that is another good add for them. And oh yeah, David Punch, he should be coming on over there as well for Tennessee Tech. They've made some nice moves under Tobin Anderson. Caleb Hollenbeck coming over from Marshall. Devontae Hackett was a double-figure scorer from Sono. A pair of guys coming over from South Florida. Now they add in their Dane Christensen, who was over at UT Rio Grande Valley. Not a guy that I think is going to light the world on fire. Guy that was averaging about 3.5 points per game at 6'7", mid-30s point shooter, but with Tobin Anderson, he's really good in terms of being able to develop guys. If this is a little bit more of a developmental piece, a guy that they're going to be looking to perhaps down the line, I think that this is very good for them, and I wouldn't doubt it with Tobin Anderson. He always has a little bit of a vision in place, just was unable to see that through at Iona, because over at Iona, they canned him very, very early on, so that was a little bit of an issue, but I do think that he's going to be able to get that chance here at Tennessee Tech, and I think immediately they're going to be solid out there in their first year in the SoCon. With Alec Oglesby, it's welcome back Potter. This guy has played for 4 different schools over, I believe now, 5 different years. He actually began during the 2020-21 season, so he is looking for year number 7 of eligibility, and he's going to try to get it over at Stetson. He began his career over at Cleveland State, played for UNC Wilmington. His best year came at Stetson during the 2023-24 season, 10.5 points, 4.5 boards, shot 40% from 3, spent the last 2 years over at Middle Tennessee. Now, in 2 seasons, he played 6 games or fewer. He's going to need to apply for a redshirt because he's already played 4 full years, but Alec Oglesby has been added to the Stetson roster, and if you're Stetson, this is a roll of the dice worth taking. If he's ineligible, who cares? Because you've got such few funds that it's not even funny. If he is eligible, you actually have a guy that's going to be very solid out there in an Atlantic Sun. Now, let's call it what it is. Not necessarily a Monsters of the Midway Conference. Hey, I like the fact that they're trying it, and it's a guy that's familiar with the system. Avery Brown, last season, he was a smart kid. He was playing over at Columbia. He's decided that he's going to be adding on over to St. John's. St. John's hasn't necessarily added rambunctious guys. Obviously, they're going to be losing guys like Zuby Ejiofor from a season ago, and they were able to get Donnie Freeman about a week or so ago. Now they add in there a guy that I think is going to be a nice little bit more of an ancillary piece. In Brown, last season over at Columbia, he was just dealing with ailment. He was unable to get out there on the floor. You look back at what he was able to do 2 seasons ago, though, and he was averaging for that team a little bit over 11 points per game from 3-point range. He was only shooting about 24% from 3. So St. John's has had their 3-point shooting issues, to say the least, under Slick Rick Pitino. This is not going to be able to help them out there, but he was a guy that was able to be solid defensively, give out 3 assists per game. This is more of a depth piece rather than anything else for St. John's, and it's very clear. Rick Pitino has come out and said it. He's not going to be recruiting any freshmen in this day and age, and he's probably wanting to save some of his NIL funds, because he was mentioning it in his comments that if these guys do get a 5th year of eligibility, well, there's a lot of schools, and I believe that his is one of them, that has already spent much of their NIL budgets. That's very much something to be noting, but that is going to be a guy that they can bring in off the bench. They do play an up-tempo style, St. John's does, so they're going to need some active bodies, and I think they can fill a role for this team. So I think that that was solid for them, and I think that this one is solid for Seattle as well. They're going to be bringing in Tyler Boston. He last season was playing over at Holy Cross. They've also already got Mason Williams coming in as well. He was over at Iowa State. Not a guy that's a lot of minutes at Iowa State, but he was over at Iowa State. Boston, a little bit more of a proven guy. In 10 games in his freshman year at Holy Cross, actually shot 81% from 3. I joke because he took 11 threes, but hey, that was solid. And this year, he obviously saw a fall off from that, but still, he shot 36% from 3, 14 points, 3.5 assists, steal per game. Recognized at Holy Cross, not necessarily a stout defensive team. Seattle, they were a team that they were really good defensively last year. They had pretty much nothing on offense whatsoever. This should be able to help them out quite a bit there, and I do think that this is a solid gift for them. For San Jose State, they have been down in the Mountain West for a very, very long time. Obviously, you've got a lot of realignment happening for they and so many others, and they've decided to put in some resources. They are going all in on Mookie Cook, a former top 100 recruit of Oregon. As a matter of fact, most had him as a top 40 recruit. Just never saw playing time over at Oregon. This last year at San Francisco, a season riddled by injuries, he was able to be a nice ancillary piece for them. 7.5 points, 4 boards, 40% three-point shooter. I take it that San Jose State is going to be rolling the dice on this guy becoming a main scorer for the team, because as of right now, they don't have a lot on the roster. They lose Kobe Garland from a season ago, but still, I think that this is a swing worth taking. If he can live like even remotely up to some of those high school aspirations when he was being recruited many, many years ago, I think that this is going to work out quite well for them. And then for Santa Clara, they add a pair of guys. David Castillo, he last season was playing over at Kansas State, and he was a nice scorer over at Kansas State. He was putting in their 10.5 points, shot 35% from three-point range. Obviously, there were a lot of things that went wrong for that team. PJ Haggerty was like the lone main guy that you could rely upon there, but he should be able to fit in that system very well. And Sidi Goy, he was at Arizona this last year, just lost in the shadow of so many great big men on that team. He had 6'10", comes over from the country of Spain, 1.5 points, about a rebound per contest. Not a guy that, unless if I'm missing something here, is going to have a lot of versatility, but should be a nice back to the basket guy. And for Santa Clara, you notice it this last season, they weren't necessarily the three-point shooting team that they have been in the past, but they were much better down low. They were a much better defensive team. They were able to generate some turnovers. They did a nice job in terms of turning over a new leaf, for a lack of a better term, and I think that they did a great job in terms of just finding their overall balance, realizing that they don't need to be just a team that is all gas, no breaks with regards to their backcourt. They were able to be quite a bit more well-rounded, so love what they're doing there. And how about Richmond putting some resources in for Chris Mooney? It's been a rough last few seasons for them, but now they had in their Dominic Stewart. He was a solid player over at Penn State this last year, shot 35% from three, 6.5 points per game, albeit Penn State played absolutely no defense whatsoever this last year, but he was able to be a starter out there in the Big Ten. They already had their Jamie Kaiser, who was rock solid over at Butler. Amon Doris was a 16-point per game over at Bucknell. Andrew Ball is a 6'8", do-it-all sort of guy that comes over from Monmouth. Richmond has made some really nice moves here in the offseason, and I think that they are revamped in an Atlantic 10 where we've seen Duquesne make some solid moves. The Georges, George Washington, George Mason, obviously they have been so active here in the offseason as well. So I really applaud the moves, and I applaud the fact that they are stepping up. They are going for Pepperdine. They certainly have as well. Adding in their Will McClendon, who a few seasons ago was a nice scorer over at San Jose State. Peter Mistrovich, double-figure guy over at Long Beach State. Evan Hayward, he was awesome over at Butler this last season. Now they add in there another guy, Ethan Muser. He was over at Stone Hill this last season. I think that this is more of an ancillary add. 6 points, 5 rebounds per game at 6'8". He is a career 35% three-point shooter, and if nothing else, Pepperdine finally has depth. They also had in there Jabari Williamson, who 2 seasons ago when he was over at Niagara was a nice three-point shooter for the team. They've done a nice job in terms of revamping this roster. They are very much deciding that they are going to stick a lot of resources in this. I applaud them for that, and I do think that things are on the up and up for them. And then the other school with the P that's out there in the WCC, they have added a few pieces as well. They already got Adrell Noya, who was over at South Florida, really didn't see a lot of minutes, and Jacob McFarland, he's going to be coming over from Houston, 6'11" big man. He had some fanfare coming out of high school, just could not see minutes because he was lost in the shadow of so many of those Houston big men, but now they also get Gavin Rippetts. Well, that's a great name. He was over at San Diego last year, about 4 points, 2.5 rebounds per game. He didn't necessarily have the world's biggest amount of production or anything like that, but with Pacific, I'm just a believer in this coaching staff in general. We saw things really get turned around in season number 2 under Dave Smart last season. Now, they are losing quite a bit from that team a season ago, whether that be through eligibility, whether that be via transfers, but I do believe in his ability to be able to mold some of these guys. They're going to need to do a little bit more in the transfer portal. Right now, they've got big-time projects, but if any of those projects do pan out, I think that this could be a team that is able to make a little bit of noise out there in the WCC. I certainly do think that with St. Mary's, they're going to be the team to beat for this upcoming season, but I do like the fact that they're making some moves, and I do like the fact that these are guys that, in my opinion, even though they might be a little bit raw, they might be a little bit unproven, they do certainly fit the system, and hopefully this podcast fits your system. As every single day on this podcast, I'm looking at the news and notes of this great sport of college basketball, trying to get you set for what is going to be an amazing 2026-27 season, and if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this this podcast, you have one of two ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So, per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Big thanks once again to Blake Lovell, does amazing work over at Southeastern 16. He joined me in the last segment, and I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast. And once the season returns, picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So appreciate you tuning in today. I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.